It's a beautiful November Saturday in Pueblo, Colorado, and today some of our Pueblo Railway Museum volunteers are tackling a special project. Back in October, the museum unleashed the Frankentrain to the delight of hundreds of Pueblo Railway Museum passengers. But if you've watched our video about the Frankentrain and how it was built and stored in the museum's D Street shop, you may have noticed that there was no track for the train to sit on when it was in the shop. Colorado winters are unpredictable and occasionally unpleasant, so it's certainly useful to be able to work indoors when possible. Our little speeder cars are small, but they're heavy. And every Saturday for a month, the Frankentrain build team had to pull the cars out one at a time, then push them all back into the shop when the day's work was finished. With no track in this part of the shop, this tedious task is hard on the train wheels. And also not so good for the concrete floor. So the volunteers decided we need track in the shop. The rail they use weighs 40 pounds per yard, and so it's called 40-pound rail. It's a light-duty rail, perfect for small cars like the speeders, but also strong enough to support larger equipment. The gauge rod on top ensures proper spacing between the rails, and the long bolts, called all-thread, hold everything in place. Laying down this track takes a lot of effort, but it's designed to be temporary. The rail is not bolted to the floor, so if needed, the entire assembly can be taken apart and set aside. There will be more work done in a couple of weeks to complete this project, but meanwhile, this beautiful November Saturday also happens to be a national holiday. It's November 11th, Veterans Day. Just a few blocks from the D Street shop, preparations are underway for Pueblo's contribution to a great American tradition, Pueblo's annual Veterans Day Parade. The Pueblo Railway Foundation and Museum is proud to count 4 veterans among its volunteer ranks. Seated at the left in this photo is museum volunteer John McDowell. Standing from left to right are Ron Roach, the museum's tour guide, Jerry Danderand, president of the Pueblo Railway Foundation, and Jerry's brother Vincent Danderand, who took part in some major projects during the museum's early years. Our 4 veterans will be riding in 2 cars in the parade, this Cadillac Eldorado, and this Ford Thunderbird. ROTC squads and marching bands from all 6 Pueblo high schools are participating in this parade. Being in a parade certainly involves a lot of walking, but before that, it also involves what probably seems to these kids like a lot of standing around and waiting. Plenty of time to chat with your friends, get in some last-minute music practice, or just hang out on top of your homemade wooden army tank. Finally, it's time to march down Union Avenue. Soon, our railway veterans make their appearance. The Pueblo Railway Foundation's participation in the parade is our way of honoring our men and women in uniform. Each Veterans Day is an invaluable opportunity for those who have served our great country to impart some of their wisdom, experience, and inspiration to the young people among us who may someday choose to serve. To all our veterans, past and present, we thank you for your service. The following Saturday, November 18th, was the Pueblo Railway Museum's Toy Run, an annual event that the museum started last year. our guests could ride our trains for half price by bringing in and donating a new unwrapped toy. Several dozen toys were collected and given to the Pueblo police and fire departments for them to distribute. The generosity of our museum patrons, together with the results of other area toy drives, will make Christmas a little brighter for lots of underprivileged children across the city. Thanks for your support. Back at the D Street shop, it's time to finish our rail construction project. The final task is to connect the spur track outside the shop to the rail that the volunteers have built. It sounds simple, but there's a catch. Let's take a closer look. Outside the back door of the shop, there's a slab of concrete called an apron. This concrete apron is at the same height as the spur track outside the shop. A small, lightweight railroad vehicle like a speeder can be moved back and forth onto the spur track without too much trouble. But the new rail now on top of the concrete apron is much higher than the existing spur track. The difference in height is too much for a railroad car to safely cross. To make a smooth connection with the new rail, the existing spur track must be raised about 4 inches out of the ground. The dirt and gravel is cleared out from underneath about 8 meters of track length. Then, special track jacks, designed just for this purpose, are used to raise the entire track assembly, wooden ties and all. The plan works to perfection. The spur track was stubborn, but is now the same height as the new rail leading into the shop. Just one more problem to solve, and it's a tricky one. For maximum strength and stability, the new rail and the spur track must be bolted together at the point where they meet at the edge of the concrete apron. When working with rails of the same size, binding them together is straightforward. Simple rectangular pieces of metal can easily be fashioned to join 2 pieces of same size rail. But the new 40-pound rail is dwarfed by the massive 85-pound rail of the spur track. Connecting these together will require some clever thinking. So our museum volunteers gathered around a whiteboard, put on their clever thinking caps, and drew up some plans. They sent the designs to Johnny's Metalworks and Boiler Shop, a local Pueblo business which has a long history of working with the museum. The boiler shop needed only a few days to produce these custom pieces of metal called joint bars. The initial fitting looks perfect. But before the final assembly, there's one more test to check the track alignment. The trackmobile, the orange vehicle in the foreground, can push and pull the flat car in the background into the shop with little effort. That means things are lined up well. The dirt and gravel is poured back in underneath the spur track and tamped down tight. Then the custom joint bars, the final pieces to this complex puzzle, are bolted into place. Behind-the-scenes activities like this typically go unnoticed by our museum guests. But these seemingly insignificant projects serve an important purpose: to improve safety and enjoyment for our guests and our museum volunteers. Thanks to Petar Sredoyevich, Larry Toit, Paul Brown, Colin Mellon, Dwight Maxey, Jerry Danderand, and Gary Carter for their perseverance in seeing this project through to completion. Special thanks to Johnny's Metalworks and Boiler Shop for the donation of their services to quickly craft those fancy custom rail joints. The newly installed rail is put to use immediately. Without the new rail, putting this flat car into the shop would not be possible. But with the flat car now safely indoors, our volunteers will be much better able to take the contents of these humble-looking boxes of decorations and turn this flat car into a giant, movable Christmas ornament that will be very impressive indeed. See you at Christmas time at the Pueblo Railway Museum.